Government is now feeling the pinch of its failures on land reform as land grabs become more popular across the country. With the 2019 elections in sight, it fears it could lose votes if it doesn't get land to the people. This led the ANC government to support a motion by the right-wing EFF party to change the constitution to allow for land expropriation without compensation. This has worried landowners and foreign investors alike. But the ANC says this should be done gently without undermining food security and the economy. The party held a land summit in Johannesburg in May. It invited lawyers, business people, and other land experts to the workshop to talk about how best to address land reform.
The resolution of the land question in South Africa is central to the achievement of a national democratic society. Without the redistribution of land, we will not be able to build a united South Africa.
The ANC enjoys support from the people, not from traditional leaders. Some traditional leaders support, or pledge their support to the ANC. But the majority of them are acting as village tin pot dictators to the people there. And the people had hopes, high hopes, that the ANC will liberate them from all these confines of homelands system. But clearly now, we are now the ones who are saying, no, the land must go to traditional leaders, not to the people.
Whatever one wants to do about land, whatever one wants to say about land, the inevitable fact is that you can never address the land crisis by releasing state-owned land. You have to target privately owned land. The second problem is that you can't avoid the race dynamic. The fact is, as we stand here today, 72% of farmland is in white hands. The third problem is the gendered nature of land reform. The fact is that men overwhelmingly own the land.
You have properties in South Africa which are owned by private individuals. There's one here, it's called Waterfall, not far from here, where the ownership is in a private individual, but the people who live there have 99-year leases over the land. The banks have been able to monetize that, to make that instrument, to finance those people. So why should it be different just because the ownership is now the state and not an individual?
But the main opposition party in South Africa, the DA, believes such radical policies will do more harm.
South Africans in many instances were denied land due to the discriminatory laws of the past, and expropriating without compensation will ultimately mean that South Africans will become permanent tenants to the state, as the state will own all the land. We believe that all South Africans must have title deeds and they must actually own their own section of South Africa. But what we cannot allow is the violation of the Constitution or changes to the Constitution to disguise poor implementation by the leading party. What we cannot afford to risk is foreign investment.
The upmarket building of Worksman's Attorneys, located in South Africa's richest city per square meter, is where Bulelwa Mabasa works. She is a lawyer who has dedicated most of her career to researching and debating land reform in South Africa.
I've been a director for just over 10 years, and I've been with the firm for 16 years. And out of those 16 years, I've been involved with land. I've always had a curiosity and a passion around land issues.
Bulelwa understands the hopes of the ANC to return the land to the people when it overcame apartheid.
When the ANC took over power, we will remember that the section that deals with property and land is Section 25 of the property. And that section in the Constitution then was the basis on which policy was framed by the ANC, land reform policy. Land reform policy is based on 3 pillars: restitution, and that is basically where claimants can lodge claims with the Commission for Restitution, which is an entity that is founded in terms of that legislation. to allow claimants to submit claims on specific land. All that the claimant has to show is that they were dispossessed, or rather their descendants were dispossessed of land after 19 June 1913, and that no compensation was paid for that land. The redistribution was really about giving people title deeds to land, which they historically didn't have. The second part of land redistribution is around emerging black farmers, which has also been a project that hasn't quite worked as well as it should have. The third pillar is what we call tenure reform. The third pillar is really about ensuring that the rights and land rights of people who work in farms or labor tenants are elevated so that they one day acquire land rights.
But she also understands where it went wrong.
Issues around education and health became at the forefront of what was the immediate, those were the immediate needs of the time, that I think land just kind of became the stepchild. It just was not a priority.
Since 1994, government spending on health has soared 974%. The rate of increase in spending on education has followed closely, surging 835%. But the pace of spending growth on housing and communities has been a lot slower. It has only increased by 286% since 1994. While most people agree that land reform must happen in South Africa, where inequalities between rich and poor are the highest in the world, government is not clear on how it will improve on the failures of the past. Tsokolo Njojo is one of the people who will watch closely. He is the CEO of the Land and Agricultural Development Bank, which lends billions of rands to emerging farmers. Tsokolo's interest in land reform dates back long before his appointment at the state-owned bank in 2014.
I was born on a farm outside the town of Tienezen, Masilonyana in the Free State. The owner of the farm, I'm told, was a certain Mr. Potgieter.
Like Bulelwa, the lawyer at Workmen's Attorneys, Tsokolo also believes expropriation without compensation is not the quick answer to fixing the land problem.
Any government can go ahead and expropriate land whichever way they want today. They can go ahead and expropriate land without compensation and so on and so on. If that program of making land available is not accompanied by appropriate planning of farm development, appropriate financing support to the sector, appropriate technical advisory services as I've indicated, appropriate marketing assistance efforts, as well as appropriate access to infrastructure such as water, I'm afraid that land availability program is likely to come to naught.
He also warns it could be tricky.
When you expropriate a piece of land and a bank has a mortgage bond on that land, as I've just indicated, the land bank has more than 43 billion in loans. The question is, what does government do with that debt that is owed to a bank? The default situation, I imagine in that situation would be that government itself, through the National Treasury, would have to compensate a bank. Where does the National Treasury get 160 billion rand? And I'm now assuming a worst case scenario where every piece of land is expropriated without compensation. In the second instance, the danger that lurks in this whole thing is that it means then the entire mortgage bond financing system by the banking sector, I think, would virtually collapse. Because why would you lend money afresh into a new environment where there is likelihood of expropriation happening without compensation to you as a lender.
Agricultural economist Wandile Sihlobo is well respected in many corridors, including those of the ANC government, who know his research well.
I started off not really thinking that I'll be an agriculture economist. I registered accounting at university in the first year, but somewhere towards the end of the first semester, that's where I changed and I went on the agriculture economics. And what's really attractive about this space was the issue, obviously, of the economic side of it, the business of farming, and also just the environment, the farming as a whole. And at that time, if you look at it around about 2008 or so, that's where we were going on the global food crisis and all of that stuff. So there was a lot of interest within the farming sector.
For Wandile, land reform cannot be successful if the land doesn't come with property rights.
More broadly, you're looking at the land reform. It's very necessary in South Africa given the historical issue of the country. But where one differs the most about is the instrument on how we actually get to be there. Because you want to make sure that you do land reform in a sustainable way, and the fact that those who get to benefit on the land reform one, they get to get in there in the sector and continue to thrive and do well. Either it's on agriculture or just the normal land using on a residential and stuff. But with the policy of expropriation, there's obviously a number of key issues, but one of the key one for me, particularly on the economic one, is around the issue of property rights, because that's the intrinsic value of telling whether the land can be used for something of economic benefit. Can you be able to borrow from the bank against the land and be able to invest and do all sorts of things? This policy seems to me as if it could undermine the property rights.
He believes the lack of rights to the land is the main reason why many land reform programs in African countries like Zimbabwe have failed.
Globally, there's just over 4 million hectares of land that is unused and arable for agriculture, and you find that about 45% or close to 50% of it, or just over 200, is in Africa, and much of that 200, 45% is in sub-Saharan Africa. You see that countries like the DRC, Congo, Sudan, and stuff, they have vast amounts of land that is unused, and even some of our neighbors like Zambia, you find that there's just north of 8 million hectares that are unused in those areas. But when you look back to the DRC, which owns, and Angola, which has abundance of unused land, most of those areas, land good for agriculture, but the issue gets to be on governance, on conflicts, lack of title deeds or ownership on those things. So all of that is what hinders investments.
Back in Bronkhorstspruit, the foot soldiers continue to get up in the morning to work the land. Land will be a bigger and more emotive issue, not just in South Africa, but also across the continent. In the run-up to the elections, political parties will be wielding it like a sword. It could also prove to be a fatal dagger in the back.
Land expropriation without compensation, it's bad for the economy, but unfortunately it's something that has to be done.